Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. As you know, we are all about our big cities in this program. We are all about the whole country. We are certainly all about Chicago, where we are broadcast on WCPT 820 AM. We love that city. I do personally, and there's a lot going on there. In the second segment of this hour, we will be talking with author Rick Perlstein about his experience as a Chicagoan covering the election there, about the mayoralty of Rahm Emanuel, why he's in trouble now, and about the candidate Chuy Garcia and what he represents for the city. But we're going to start out, because most of our listeners are not Chicagoans, we're going to start out by talking about why the Chicago race is important in the broad national picture and what you maybe can do to help out if you are not living there in Chicago, as well as if you are. So joining us for that is Matt Bilzek. Matt is the electoral field director for MoveOn.org. Matt has worked for Chicago Votes and a number of other electoral and advocacy organizations, and we are glad to have him. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So listen, exciting news in Chicago. Rahm Emanuel, who is expected to pretty much coast to re-election, plunged precipitously in the polls in the several days before the primary, and is now going to face a runoff against Chuy Garcia. So my question for you is, we're going to get into the Chicago story in depth, but for progressives and folks all across the country, why does this matter?
Sure. Well, I think this matters for several reasons. I think that all too often in races across the country, progressives and voters have to pick between candidates that are the lesser of two evils oftentimes. And here in Chicago, it's a nonpartisan mayor's race, but it was very clear the distinction between the current mayor Rahm Emanuel, who has a long history of thwarting progressive priorities, everything from the public option to help pushing through NAFTA, in his time in Congress and the White House. And since he's taken over as mayor of Chicago, he's really instilled those policies and really pursued a very corporatist privatization agenda, most particularly on education, but on a number of other issues as well too. What I think that the results showed is that that it shows the potency of when you have a candidate like Jesus Chuy Garcia that is really embracing this kind of populist rhetoric that we're seeing other candidates across the country embracing, like Elizabeth Warren, like Bill de Blasio in New York City. It shows the potency of that, and it shows that even if a candidate like Rahm Emanuel has all these advantages, like the power of incumbency, millions and millions of dollars in more funding from big Wall Street donors, and even the President of the United States coming to Chicago to stop for him, even with all those advantages, he still was a majority of Chicagoans voted against him on Tuesday. And I think that really just shows the potency of, the kind of populist rhetoric and policies that Chuy Garcia was advocating, particularly when contrasted with a candidate with a record like Rahm Emanuel.
Now, I want to get into that for a second, because people around the country, I think, are sometimes discouraged by the power of incumbency, and especially the power of campaign contributions. I would say the corrupting power of campaign contributions. Rahm Emanuel, in this election that was just completed, had what political scientists refer to as mad dollars. He just had a lot more money than any of his competition. I don't know how much he outspent Chuy Garcia by, but it was a lot. And so why did he lose the votes of a majority of voters?
Sure. Well, yeah, he outspent Chuy Garcia 12-1, and that's not even counting the money that he raised for his super PAC, which spent millions attacking Chuy Garcia, as well as attacking other city council candidates that dared to vote against Rahm Emanuel on the city council. I think that the victory here, wasn't. It's important to point out this was not just something that came together last minute, because of the Chuy Garcia campaign. I think that the Garcia campaign has definitely been a vehicle for it, but the groundwork for what happened Tuesday has been laid here in Chicago for the last several years, with organizations like Grassroots Collaborative, Reclaim Chicago, Chicago Votes, and the United Working Families, which is affiliated with the Working Families Party, that's had this type of success in New York City. All of these organizations have been, building the groundwork and building the progressive infrastructure in Chicago for several years now. And I think a lot of folks, compare, what happened in New York City to Chicago. A lot of folks were thinking, well, this was Chicago's, 2009 election in New York City, where progressives, gave it a good run, but it ended up coming short. And I think that, the results Tuesday night showed we're actually a lot further along here. And the movement building that's been happening in Chicago these last 4 years has really, really paid off. And I think the results show we're in a real position to win this race now. And I think that's something that's really exciting. And, Rahm Emanuel is going to have all of these same advantages. He's going to have, still mad money, as you say, going into the runoff election. But I think that, there is no way that he could have outspent us any more than he did in this previous race. And I think that, his problem isn't all the money. His problem is that, voters, he doesn't have credibility with voters. And the message that he's trying to get out is not one that's really resonating with voters across Chicago. Nothing close to like the message that Chuy Garcia's message is resonating with folks.
One of the things that I was thinking about, Matt Bilzek, you're the electoral field director for MoveOn.org, and so you follow this stuff closely. I follow this stuff closely. It took me back to when I was election night broadcasting in the 2014 elections, where we really felt a lot. The conventional wisdom was that the Democrats would lose nationwide because of some of the specifics of the congressional and Senate races, but that there were some Democrats, centrists, who would, pretty much coast to or pretty well guaranteed re-election. And yet everybody was surprised, all the professionals were surprised by the lack of enthusiasm for the more centrist Democrats, who got pretty much wiped out in this election, and by the grassroots enthusiasm for some of the voter initiatives, whether it was on legalization of marijuana or on minimum wage or whatever. So we saw a kind of populist upsurge. Is the Chicago outcome Tuesday part of that, and is that why you're optimistic that we could actually see a new mayor get elected?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that, Illinois is a perfect example of the dynamic we saw in 2012 that you just described. Voters statewide in Illinois, voted overwhelmingly to approve a referendum raising the minimum wage, while at the same time voting in Bruce Rauner for governor, who is kind of a Scott Walker wannabe here and now our current governor in Illinois. Who outright said he does not even believe in a minimum wage. And I think what that shows is the disconnect between the values the voters, want to see and, the messages that, too many Democrats try to run to the middle and be this wishy-washy centrist that doesn't stand for anything.
Harry Truman is often misquoted, but the misquoted Harry Truman had a lot of wisdom in him, as saying in a race between a Republican and a Republican, the Republican wins every time. Is that kind of what we saw? And are we really seeing, and by the way, if the Republican is a centrist Democrat, a corporatist Democrat, which is what I personally would call Rahm Emanuel, then does this mean that if someone can get in there and really push the populist message, that can even overcome the money advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what this race shows, and I think that it also, it also takes candidates that are willing to actually, run and be bold on that message, and that's something that Chuy Garcia has really, been one of the main themes of this campaign, really, echoing this theme that there really are two Chicago, like there are two Americas, and to just about every major city. Rahm Emanuel's been, very good for the downtown of Chicago, for the kind of gleaming, downtown businesses, in the tourist areas, while there are parts of Chicago that have been completely left behind, that suffer from, endemic violence, that, schools, Rahm Emanuel closed down 49 different community schools in some of these neighborhoods. And Chuy Garcia has really been positioning himself as the neighborhood mayor. Someone that thinks that, prosperity in Chicago should really start in the neighborhood. And that's how we're going to have a city that really, truly does work for everyone. And that's something that really is resonating with folks.
Yeah, and one of the things I really like about Chuy Garcia is that he lives in that part of Chicago. He doesn't. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. He walks the way he talks. I mean, I'm just learning about him, to be honest. But I like what I'm hearing. And let me ask you, in closing, what can people do if they are either in Chicago or around the nation and want to encourage this trend of unseating the centrists, so-called, and putting real populists in office? How can they help the Garcia campaign?
Absolutely. I think there's several things they can do. I think first and foremost, the Garcia campaign needs the funding support of grassroots progressives across the country. We've seen so often that when progressives everywhere, when we really can unite and we can all chip in $5, $10, $25, that times millions and millions can really add up and help level the playing field. And I think that more than ever now, the financial support, and small dollar donations of progressives across the country, is really, really important right now. Because
so where can they go to do that?
Sure. So they can donate directly to the Garcia campaign at GarciaForChicago.com, their website. They can also go to MoveOn.org. We're doing our own fundraising with MoveOn members to help fundraise for the Garcia campaign as well too. We are also going to be we've partnered with some other organizations involved in this race, like Democracy for America, like Daily Kos, to make it so that people across the country can help you get out the vote phone calls for the Garcia campaign. We had made over 40,000 calls just before the runoff, and we're going to do substantially more than that in the weeks and months to come. So I would encourage folks, if you should sign up for, MoveOn.org emails, Democracy for America emails. We'll be sending out, notifications on that and putting those out across the internet in the weeks to come to make sure that, progressives all across the country can really, step up and make a difference in this race.
Well, we will send we encourage folks to go to those websites if they want to help the Garcia campaign, and tell them the 0 Hour sent you. Matt Bilzek, Electoral Field Director for MoveOn.org, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. We will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the 0 Hour.